Let's go through LeetCode 850, rectangle area 2. And this question gives us a two-dimensional array rectangles. And for example, the example 1, there are 3 rectangles. This one. And this one. And the third one is this, right? And let's find the total areas. For every rectangle, every subarray have 4 elements. That is x1, x1, y1, x2, y2, right? So for this kind of question, what we're thinking about is that we can use separate. We want to find the total areas. We can separate this area into small pieces. For example, this is one piece. This is the second piece, right? And then we have the third piece is like this, right? So for every part, if we have in the x-axis, we find the width. And in the y-axis, we find the height. Then, for example, this width I, height I, right? Then we'll get this area. And also this width and this height, right? We'll get this area. And also we'll get this width and this height, right? We'll get this area. Then we sum them up. So for the rectangle, we can consider those rectangle, for example, this rectangle, that is an edge. The left edge, right? Left edge, we consider that is like an interval entering. And on the right edge, we can consider that is an interval leaving. And also here, this is the left edge, right? We can use a red for left and also blue for leaving, right? So also we have a leaving here. We have another interval entering here, and also another interval leaving it here, right? So what are we thinking about for this kind of question is that we swipe on the x-axis, and every time it's very easy for us to find the width, right? The delta x, the width. But the height is that we need to separate those kind of intervals. It's like an interval, adding an event interval, and at a point 0, at point 1, we add another interval. Use a real one, right? At point 0, we have one interval adding, and at point 2, we have width with 3, right? And also our interval with like this, it's from here to here, that entry. And at the width, at the point 2, right? We have this one leaving. So we'll have this one leaving, right? And also this one also leaving, right? Leaving. And at the point 3, we'll have this one leaving, right? This one leaving. So on the y-axis, we also want to see what kind of the heights, or the heights, those kind of intervals will cover. So there are 2 different events. One, like the red one, is interval entering events. For this kind of events is that for the start of the interval, we use a plus sign. Leaving of the interval, we use a minus sign, right? And for the leaving event, start, we just use -1, and this end of the interval, we are +1, so that we can compensate this kind of event back. And so that on the y-axis, we want to see the heights, right? So we know this is like a merge interval things, right? And on the y-axis, we call it heights. It's not necessary to be contiguous. Sometimes it may be separated into two different segments. So we'll say we can, on the y-axis, we can have a sum variable. And every time this sum to calculate the +1 and the -1, right? If this sum comes from 0 to a positive number, that means that is the start of the merged interval. And if we come from a positive number to 0, that is the end of a merged interval, right? And then we, on the y-axis, we also sum all of the segments that will be the heights of the y. Then we have, for example, this one will be height, and this one will be width, and we'll get this area. And also at this point, we also add another point, right? Add several points. This is the end, two intervals, right? This interleaving. Or we'll say 4 points, interleaving. And we also, on y-axis, we'll have to calculate, use a swipe line on y-axis to get its heights. So let's begin to write code for this. Let's say this question, it says that the number is very big. So we're going to mod. So we'll have private link static link mod first one. No. And we want to on the axis, we want to have separate those kind of rectangle left edge and right edge into some kind of events, right? So what we are going to do is that, for example, this point at 0, right? We want to have y1, this is 0, and y2 is 2, and that is entering events, right? So we are going to have put this one. And at point 1, we have two of this, right? So two of the edge entering. So that is 0, 1. Well, we use 1 as the entering flag. And 0, 2, 1, right? And at point 2, there are 2 leaving. So that is 0 to -1. We use -1 to represent the leaving events. So in this case, we can use data structure map, right? Map integer and a list of this. Map. For x-axis, we want to sort, so we use a QMap. And what to store in this list is those kind of arrays, right? This kind of arrays. So we are saying for each rectangle, we'll have int x1 is rectangle 1, 0, and int y1 was rectangle 1, int x2 rectangle 2, and int y2 was rectangle 3. And for this tree map, we'll have map put x1, right? This is the age entry. Okay, goes to, let's do this because this list may not exist. Map compute if I've set x1, it goes to new array. Yes, then what we are going to is add here int y1, y2. This is entering, that is one, right? For the age on the right, that is the living event. So we'll have 2. And this will be -1, right? So we on the x-axis, we use this tree map to put those kind of to separate those kind of edges as list of intervals, and also this kind of interval have a entering or leaving events. On the y-axis, we also need to calculate its height, right? So we'll have long area, material, okay. And let's swipe on the x-axis. And let's say last. Equals -1, okay? And for int key in this map dot key set, right? So we are iterate swipe on this case, right? On the y-axis, we dynamically add some kind of intervals. We also need some efficient way. If we use collections, every time we need to sort, right? So we can also use a tree map to store those kind of segments. But on y-axis, we can put the interval, one interval as 2 points. One is a starting point, and another is a leaving point. So we can also use a tree map on the y-axis. That is we call vertical map. Okay, what's a new tree map? So let's say if this last does not go to -1, that means our width. Okay, we get our width equals t minus last. Otherwise, we'll have last equals t, right? So in this case, we'll get this kind of width, right? This kind of width, but we need to calculate its height. And at this point, if last, then last equals key, okay? So in this case, we need to, that means we're at this point, we can calculate in this kind of areas. And no matter whether it is last or every time, for every key, right? We need to add those kind of intervals to this kind of, to separate the intervals as as a point to add this vertical map. So we also we need to have those kind of things here, right, to add to this map. And what we want to calculate the height is on the one which is previously calculated. So we can should be the status here, right? And but so we can right click here to add a point to this vertical map. So we'll say for this kind of in at this point that's the map it's here. So let's say this one can be our entering events or leaving events. So if P 0, 1, 2, right? So if P2 equals 1, then this is a entering event. Else, this is a leaving event. For the entering events, what we are going to do is that we'll have map put P0, right? P0 is Y0 at this point. And P1. And we have 1 into it, right? Put P0. Just say we map it or default, right? P0, 0, classic. And we map for this age when this interval leaving this point, that means that is the end of the interval. We have a map put P0, P1, right? P1, and we map it default. It all default P1, 0, let's say -1, right? And this is entering, and for the leaving, we'll do the opposite operations. So what we are going to do is that we are have this one instead of +1, we'll have -1 here, and this one to add back, right? So this is on the vertical part. What we are going to do is we are going to add this point to the tree map. And on the vertical part, we need to calculate the height, right? So we are saying into height because there, it's we call it height. It is actually the merge interval what it covers. So we are also have we'll have a sum equals 0 and 3 equals 0. We know if sum coming from 0 to a positive number, then that means that is the start of the interval. Okay, so let's have int start equals -1. Okay, and for every key int I in V map of key set, right? We'll have sum plus equal to V map with 1. Okay. So let's say if this pre equals 0 and sum greater than 0, that means that is the start of the interval, right? So we'll have start plus I. And we'll say if sum equals 0 and pre greater than 0. That means this is the end of our interval. We'll have 8 is equal to I minus start. Okay. So for every vertical line, right? We already have the heights. Then we also have this is something. So we'll have area, well, is equal to the width multiplied by the height. Let's do this. Area equals, because we want to mod, right? Area plus 1L multiply width multiply height, and then we need to multiply mod. And in the end, we return integer error. Okay, so for this kind of question, if we have n rectangle, yeah, so on the x-axis, that is n operations, right, iterations. On the y-axis, if we have, that is also n points, but that they will have tree map. So it will be axis we also sort, right? So will be n log n, and y that is also log operations. And so but this one is n log n, right? So then we just sort the key, just swap the keys. So on the y that is n log n, right? So if there are n rectangle, so we'll have the n log n operations. And for the space, we have a map that is linear, right? Linear, that is the O n space.